What's good? It's Reese, and it's another episode of Reese G on the Rail. And today I'm back with Dr. Jeannelle Perkins Muhammad, and we're going to get real about mental wellness, mental health, however you want to say it. She's going to give us some insight on mental health and relationships and how we can do better.
Take care of ourselves, right?
That part right
Better
there.
take care of ourselves.
That's it.
For sure. I think it's interesting because one of the things that most people don't recognize is that there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. So we don't always talk about that. So when it comes to mental health, everyone at one way or another is really working on how they process information, right? How they're feeling, what's happening in their body, why they're feeling the way they're feeling. That's normal. Your mental health is just your state of understanding that, you're happy, you're sad, maybe you might be crying today, you're overjoyed because something wonderful happened, and that you actually can process that in a way that's kind of normal. You can talk to people about it. Mental illness comes into play when we have behaviors that we call maladaptive behaviors. Those behaviors that now create a situation where you're stressed out, so maybe you're angry and you're yelling at individuals that you wouldn't normally yell at, right? Where you have so much anxiety that it's very difficult to have a conversation, particularly one that has conflict in it. Maybe sadness to the point of being depressed. Not cleaning up behind yourself. I'm not saying that everybody with a nasty house is depressed. I'm just saying that there are these moments where you can see a difference, a shift in how someone might be operating in life. And so if someone normally keeps things really clean and then suddenly their home is a mess. So one of the things that happens when someone might be living with anxiety, depression, maybe even a personality disorder, is that you begin to see that there's a change in their behavior, a change in the way that they function. Now, there are some people who grow up in anxious environments, so their regular, normal state of living is one of constant, rapid heartbeat, constant sweating. They're constantly thinking to themselves, what's about to happen? Who's getting ready to do something to me? And then, when they get to a place where treatment is required, because they're not able to have quality relationships, that's when we usually find out that there's some sort of mental illness going on. So it's important to recognize that mental health is something we all work with all the time. But mental illness means that there are behaviors behind it that are creating an environment where it's unstable.
So for the most part, most people deal with mental health.
All people do.
We all do.
All people have. Every person in the earth breathing will work with, in one way or another, their mental health. It is just a state of well-being, right? It's when your mental health is challenged by either activities that have taken place, chemical imbalances within the body, death in a family, grief that is complex, goes beyond the period of time that we would consider to be normal grief, right? Could then end up in a space where it's considered a mental illness because the complexity of it brings about the depression, the anxiety, and so forth.
So when people feel like, I'm dealing with a type of mental illness, maybe it's just stress, job-related, stress-related, anxiety, work-related, relationship related, like how do they go about dealing with it initially before it gets to a point where they may need to seek professional help? That's
one of the biggest challenges because it's recognizing that it exists, right? So again, it's about being able to know yourself well enough to know at this particular time I'm not doing well, right? But then being able to say something to someone, because we have such a stigma on mental health in and of itself that when a mental illness comes into play, it's even worse. So it's so important to be able to say to yourself, I'm feeling really a rapid heartbeat that I'm not used to. Or noticing my hair seems to be falling out. What's that about? Or if you find that you're always angry. People, sometimes say we're always angry as Black women. Not true.
At all.
But you do recognize when there are those moments where something doesn't call for that much anger or irritation, but all of a sudden you've responded very differently than someone might normally respond. And how do we help ourselves? we gotta speak up or listen to someone close enough to us who can say, I think there's something happening. Have you thought about seeing your doctor? Start with a physician, because most people have no difficulty going to see their physician.
No.
Yeah, but you tell them to go see a counselor, and girl, how you gonna tell me?
I don't need that. Yeah, like something wrong with me.
I go to the altar.
Yeah, that's it too. That's it too.
Right.
That's it too. So like, what if, for example, you're dealing with work-related anxiety, or you have a bad situation at work, and you're not like, you don't have the heart rate that's rapid, or you're just trying to cope. How do you cope the best way with those situations?
You know what's interesting? You say you don't have the heart rate that's
but
rapid.
you don't realize
You
it.
just don't realize.
Really?
Sometimes you're so used to the environment that you're in that you don't recognize that there's something wrong. But so we have it in our field, psychology, doing therapy. We look at mental illness from an anxiety perspective in a couple of different ways. So there's generalized anxiety, which is just a matter of everything that's happening in life has a tendency to make you feel some level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Either weak in the knees, difficulty breathing, that rapid heartbeat, the palpitations that I just spoke of, or the way in which you show up in the world, you're a little bit more sensitive, right? But then there's adjustment disorder that may have anxiety or depression. And generally speaking, that shows up when you have something in your life that has changed over the course of a few weeks.
Okay.
And within those few weeks, it's so drastic of a change that it creates those environments where you're suddenly quite depressed, or suddenly there's a lot of anxiety. So there's a difference between having an adjustment disorder with anxiety or depression and actually being in a state of generalized anxiety or have a major depressive disorder.
Okay. So what about now when you're dealing with mental health, mental illness, and relationships?
One of the biggest challenges that I find coming through my office is the acceptance of the mental health and mental illness versus saying, oh, he or she just doing that because that's what they want to do.
Okay.
So when a couple comes in, whether married or just coupled, right? Generally speaking, I'm looking for why. Where does this exist? Why is there such anxiety? Why is someone shutting down, right? He just won't talk. She just won't talk. Every time we reach a certain topic, they just shut down. Well, that's anxiety.
Oh, really? Okay.
It is. Stonewalling is what we call that, right?
Okay.
But that is anxiety that literally says to your brain and your body, there's no way I can win this thing. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what words. Maybe you told a lie. Maybe you did some things that really were not appropriate. Having the ability to cope with that could be a challenge. So that anxiety kicks in and suddenly there's nothing you can do or say. Doesn't mean the person is literally just lying for the purpose of being lying.
Okay.
Yeah. So in relationships, what I often see is that a couple will come in, or even the individual will come in, and they'll start describing symptoms of a relationship that has gone wrong, very wrong.
Symptoms in regards to an example.
Yeah, so if you come in as an individual, I always say to people, when you come through the door, you still bring all your family members with you. So there's a lot that has happened throughout your life. So you come in and talk about, oh, my cousin and I are constantly fighting, and I can't seem to build a good relationship with my mom, or I don't have the ability to talk to my siblings because they are doing this to me, whatever that might be. I'm going to run down some things like, well, tell me about your past. What happened in childhood? Because it could be impacted by your childhood. If you didn't have good attachments in childhood, someone constantly neglected you in even the smallest of ways, there could be abandonment issues.
Okay.
So what do? You hold on to everybody who comes through your world like they are your breath, your life. So when a relationship falls apart, suddenly you can't even begin to function normally.
Wow.
So stalkers,
Yeah.
people who still send you text messages when you said I'm not talking to you,
Yeah.
likely abandonment.
Okay. So what other type of issues in relationships? How does it tie into mental health and mental illness?
Well, sometimes when there's erectile dysfunction, we don't think of it as being a mental illness or having to do with a mental health disorder.
Okay, yeah.
But it does, because very much so, often, not always, erectile dysfunction in relationships is all about the mind. Absolutely.
That's
How you think about it, how you think about your performance,
Okay.
whether or not, and not just for men, women have issues,
Okay.
right? So I know much later in the year, we're going to talk a lot about sex and intimacy.
Yes.
Well, that's how you're impacted from a mental health perspective.
Okay.
Is because when your anxiety is high, it's going to be that much more difficult to function.
Okay.
And if you're angry, depressed,
Oh, yeah.
oh my goodness, there's no way.
Yeah, because it all starts in the mind anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All your emotions and
Mhm.
feelings and how that's being displayed, that's going to impact your ability to perform sexually. In addition to that, a lot of times we see a lot of high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes. Well, think about if you're one of those individuals who has been depressed for some time, but we cover it. Because
Okay.
as a people, we have a tendency to look sharp all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be fly.
That's it.
But we're covering some things
Oh, yeah.
often,
Mhm.
right? So when you're in a situation where you find yourself trying with everything in you to look your best everywhere you go, but you know that when you're at home, it's difficult to function,
Mm-hmm.
like you're not even motivated to do the normal things you might do in life, it impacts the relationships you're in. Because they think, well, when you go out there, you can tell everybody else how to do, and you can pretend to be so great, but you come back in here, where's that person who's out there?
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with self-evaluation anyway.
Mhm.
But then also on the flip side, what about the people that are in your life that notice the difference and you haven't talked to them about it? How do they address the person that they're noticing is having some issues?
That can be very challenging because it all depends on what the relationship is like.
Okay.
Right? And if the relationship is one where you haven't had an opportunity to build trust between you, then for someone to tell you that you need mental health help can be challenging. But being able to see it and understand that there are trigger points. Triggers can be good and bad, right? But there are trigger points. So if someone is actually responding negatively to what you say and do, you might step back for a moment and think, okay, this happens every time we have a conversation about having children. Or every time there's a conversation about the fact that your children aren't doing something that they need to be doing, right? Because friends can always see in another person's child.
What they can't see.
Right. So when we have this conversation, you become more angry than actually taking the opportunity to listen and understand what might be being said. Because it could be a matter of just one adjustment in the relationship that could create a more quality of life, a better quality of life in that relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that introspection,
Yeah.
oh, that can be so difficult.
No, of course it is. Because
Yeah.
people don't want to address their
No.
flaws. They want to think, even when they know, you know that you got some issues, you still don't want to come to the fact of accepting the fact that you have issues.
Absolutely.
So that is definitely challenging. But also, like I said before, like when you have someone that's a loved one, and I really believe it's how you say things to people. Say, hey, I'm noticing something a little different. You okay? Everything's good with you. You know, you can always talk to me.
Right.
You know.
Right. Well, hopefully you're that person they can always talk to.
Yeah.
Because you want to be trustworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would suggest the person that would say that would be a person that they can feel like they can come to. I thought that I wasn't really close to that person, or we didn't have that type of relationship. I probably wouldn't say anything, and because I'm
different.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't receive it well.
Right.
You know, because they're like, well, who are you to tell me?
Right.
You know.
Right.
But I just think if you're in a situation where you're close with somebody and you have that type of relationship, like, hey, I'm just calling to check on you. Everything good with you? You all right? Because I think there's ways you could do it without necessarily coming out and saying, oh, something wrong with you. What's going on with you? You may need to go
absolutely.
see somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also, as the individual who is loving that person, being able to understand or do some research on what you think you see. Now, I'm not telling people to walk around diagnosing everybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Because there are a number of terms right now that we use for just about everybody as a blanket. But the truth of the matter is, if you think you see something, go and do some research. Try to figure out whether or not they really are anxious, highly anxious. We all have a level of anxiety. But if you're looking at a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 anxiety might be that they're just like, ooh, I gotta talk in front of these people.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah.
get myself together. And all right,
That's
here
it.
we go. But a 10 anxiety in that same situation is sweating profusely, their hands are shaking, they like on a regular basis they can't catch their breath, yet they still have to get up and do this presentation, so they may faint.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I had somebody experience a panic attack. Like anxiety led to a panic attack. And almost thought it was a heart attack.
Oh, it's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we always say to our clients that if you think you're having a heart attack, if it feels like that kind of pressure, go to the ER. Because we can't tell the difference between a panic attack and a heart attack.
Wow.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
So you might as well go ahead and get checked out. And you'll find that your blood pressure is really high, or some people, their blood pressure drops and they faint.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So that's what happens.
In anxiety. And most people think that all anxiety is a racing heart. No. Sometimes that blood pressure plummets.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Well, then also too, like you were saying, going around diagnosing people. You also don't need to try to treat people. Sometimes you just need to listen. You know, this is what you need to do. Because you're not professional to do that.
No.
And maybe they just need to get it off their chest and listen. Because sometimes you just, even people that don't deal with mental illness or whatever, just even for me, sometimes it just feels good to just get it off my chest and just share it with somebody that I can trust. And then I can just be done with it and I move on with it. Sometimes that's what people need. Just that will help go a long way.
I think what's interesting about that is when you go to a professional, you're not getting the advice from what I would do is. You're truly getting professional advice. So what the research shows me is, versus, girl, in my situation, let me tell you what, he wouldn't talk to me like, I ain't. Beyond that, I'm going to look at it and say, well, let's talk about boundaries. How do you draw boundaries? How do you decide what the expectations are? Because those who don't set expectations set themselves up for resentment.
Okay.
Truly. If you don't tell people what you expect from them, if you don't draw those boundaries, you're going to walk around mad all the time.
Yeah.
Because no one can meet an expectation that has not been verbalized.
Yeah, well, that's true. Because they don't even know it.
They don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And that leads to so many other areas where your emotions are all in disarray. Suddenly you can't regulate how you feel and what you think. Everybody in the environment is after you. You become paranoid. Everybody's talking about me. Really? Are they? Or is it that that's what you're hearing based on your own emotional state? And I'm not being dismissive because there are some situations where that's true. It could very well be. At the same time, we need to figure out what is it within you that's creating an environment where you care that much, and now it's stopping you from being able to move forward in life.
That's interesting.
And I can always go way back and dig
And find the source.
and find the source. And when we find it, we root it out.
Well, that's good. Because that makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of times we have events in our lives that we think we're over and we got past it, but we don't realize we're still dragging a little bit of it. And like you said, bringing it into present day circumstances, because it's never really fully addressed.
No. And if you don't treat trauma, if you don't treat drama that has been in your life from childhood, it will show up in your adult life, one way or the other. So where as a kid you used to throw these temper tantrums on the floor, feet in the air, as an adult you do those things like stonewalling, you shut down, right? It's the same temper tantrum.
It's just done in a different way.
Done in a different way. You could scream and holler your head off as a kid. As an adult, you scream, but you do, because you cuss people out in the streets.
Okay.
You get in the store with your spouse or your mate, and you treat them like they don't exist. It's the same as a temper tantrum. Or, get this one, this is a big one. You'll say to your mate, are you going to wear that? When you could have just said, you know, I like the other dress better. It looks really nice on you. Or, that shirt you wear, the one, ooh, you sexy in that shirt. You need to wear that one. So what ends up happening with, you're going to wear that? You get out in public and you see someone that looks better. And you go, wow, you look amazing. Doesn't she look amazing? That's the most passive-aggressive behavior.
Wow.
But it's a temper tantrum.
Really?
Oh, yes. Mental health impacts relationships hugely. And you have to be able to make decisions about whether or not you want to stay in relationship with someone who is living with or suffering with, by choice, a mental illness, right? Or whether or not you're exiting that situation so your own mental health stays intact. That's important. Now, a lot of times people think, well, if I know they're ill, then I have to stay to help them through it. No, you don't. We have way too many resources in this world to help people through their challenges. But they have to want to accept that kind of help.
That's it. That's it. But we're just getting started. Right? We'll be talking mental health and mental illness and relationships with family, relationships with couples.
Yeah.
We're going to dig deep into this to help you out. So if you're dealing with any type of issues within your family, relationships, mental health, mental illness, this just touched the surface now. As Dr. Jeannelle said, if you need to seek therapy and seek some professional assistance, then we strongly encourage you to do that.
Absolutely.
Strongly. And like you said earlier, our next time we get together is going to be about what?
Sex and intimacy.
I noticed that you cheese with everything in you.
Time.
So yeah, we look forward to getting together with that.
I'm going to get really deep. And everything I do is interactive. And it's, now if I said interactive, right?
I heard you say that and I said, oh, in my mind, I'm like,
how does that work?
No.
Well, I'm not going to do anything that's outside of the realm of the God I serve.
That's it. Okay, sister.
So I'm not going to hell for y'all.
That's it. I'm trying to help y'all out. Right?
No, but it's really going to be good.
Okay, good. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
I'll bring in some samples.
Okay.
Don't be wide-eyed now.
Woo, and on that note, thank you guys for watching. Once again, if you want to get in contact with Dr. Jeannelle, her information is on my website, recg.com, which will be on the screen. And until next time, peace and blessings.